Is everyone sitting comfortably, chat? Because I have a little bit of a story to tell you all, right? So get on a nice cozy, get a dressing gown on. Get cozy with me. Huddle up by the fire. Get yourself a nice hot chocolate, a cup of tea, right? Maybe a snack, a little biscuit or something like that. A shortbread, potentially. Because it is story time. 2022 is behind us, and what a year it was. And I wanted to explain why. I wanted to talk a little bit about why I actually think that 2022 was an incredibly remarkable year for Guild Wars 2. Maybe not the year of Guild Wars 2, but an incredible recovery of a game. And before we actually get into 2022, I want to set the scene a little bit, right? Maybe for those who perhaps aren't familiar with the situation of Guild Wars 2. After all, Guild Wars 2 has had more new players join the game in a single year time period than from back in the day when the game originally went free to play. So there's loads of new people about the place who may not be aware of just what a journey Guild Wars 2 has had. So let's take a stroll down memory lane just to set the scene here a little bit. Let's go back to 2019, right? And oh boy, things did not go well. Basically, it turned out that ArenaNet were working on a whole bunch of other projects. Guild Wars 2 was kind of going on a little bit of semi-maintenance mode, right? With this stuff, it was actually a Dune-style game, and hey, that game is actually coming out as it turns right now. It's Dune Awakening, being made by Funcom, survival MMO. So stay tuned for that, guys. Dune, why become a worm? Good question. Click the video. Good YouTube channel, actually. But that's not the point. Basically, things were not looking hot for Guild Wars 2, right? The morale was low. Everyone was dooming. NCSoft was swinging the axe, right? It's not looking good, guys. In fact, it's looking very bad because it turns out that they even basically had a bit of a roll credits moment at the end of Living World Season 4, which was kind of the end of the arc that was happening in 2019. The dragon, one of the protagonists here, literally flies off into the sunset and they have a full-on epilogue. This is where we were. Everyone thought, oh my god, this is it. It's over. Guild Wars 2 is done, right? And it will just be kind of ticking along for a little bit longer until eventually there's something else. Like there's some other type of video game, right? Like this is basically what's going on. But then it turns out that, oh no, there's going to be another thing. There's going to be an adjustment into the future. And it turns out that, we actually did have an announcement for End of Dragons. That actually came in 2020. In March of 2020. And obviously people were excited. You know, they pulled out the Cantha card, very old favorite, from Guild Wars 1. Oh yes, we're going back over here. We're going to Cantha. Very exciting stuff. However, the excitement was tempered with a little bit of pure, unadulterated fear because of something else. This is what happened. And actually, we had the Icebrood Saga before we had End of Dragons. Now, this is basically a new formulation of the Living World format that ArenaNet had been updating the game with for a very long time. The only problem is that they basically had nothing. They hyped up this massive announcement with some really cool cinematics. It looked pretty interesting. It was like, whoa, this is going to be crazy. Everyone was excited to see what was going to happen. And then we had this announcement, which was honestly one of the most disappointing announcements I have ever seen in any video game. It was basically half an hour of incredibly awkward and horrified talk, basically talking about not much at all. The only person here who really looked happy was this guy who came in right at the last second, okay? Like some kind of Sith Lord to talk about Funko Pops and buying the soundtrack on Tidal. That was basically the entire thing, right? And honestly, I actually think that ArenaNet knew that they didn't have anything, right? Because the game director at the time was Mike Z, and this was another reason for a lack of confidence in the game, is that Guild Wars 2 were kind of going through game directors like there was nobody's business. We had Mike O'Brien, boom, gone. Mike Z, yeah, he's basically gone very shortly after this, right? And he did not look happy during this announcement, because I think he knew that, yeah, this was not going to be super well received. I think he knew this was going to be scuffed. And honestly, I legitimately feel bad for the guy here, and no disrespect to Mike Z. I've actually met Mike Z at Gamescom a while ago. One of the most knowledgeable players and developers I've had the pleasure of talking to about Guild Wars 2, right? He really knew his stuff. I was actually really impressed when I had this conversation with him in Cologne a while ago, because he really knew what the hell was going on. And it was definitely pretty painful to watch this guy have a seriously tough time and kind of manage the game in a very difficult period in the game's history. That's for sure. But basically, the Icebrood Saga came out. I'm not gonna lie, it didn't go super well. But one of the really interesting things about the Icebrood Saga is that it actually started out pretty strong. And this is kind of where the layoffs start to materialize here a little bit. Because one of the reasons why the Icebrood Saga didn't work out super hot was basically because halfway through they were doing it, NCSoft or ArenaNet came to the decision and they said, actually, you guys make this expansion for us, okay? So the Icebrood Saga was basically thrown together with a bit of a skeleton crew towards the end of it. It ended up unbelievably scuffed. And just to really finish setting the scene here, the morale in the game had never been lower, right? Content creators were incredibly dissatisfied with the game, including, like, long-time stalwarts like Deroya and Wooden Potatoes. The subreddit was on fire, right? The forums were bursting into flames. And honestly, a lot of people were leaving the game, right? It definitely felt like an incredibly dark part of the game's history, and I think a lot of people felt like it was the end, right? And that it would take an absolute miracle to recover the game with Guild Wars 2 End of Dragons. Before End of Dragons came out, the big problem was that ArenaNet knew that they needed to make the expansion, unsurprisingly, right? This was a big problem. That ArenaNet realized that, hang on a minute, we're actually going to have to make this thing, right? We're going to have to make a whole new expansion. They hadn't had it planned. They basically dropped what they were doing and went full steam ahead to make a new expansion. And that's new, right? Because obviously the way the studio has worked previously is that they were developing content for the live game, so basically Icebrood Saga or Living World, in tandem with developing a new expansion. Because that makes sense, right? You kind of leapfrog each other, so you always have new content coming into the game. However, that changed this time. They had to basically start from scratch and push it out as quick as possible. And this led to a major content drought, right? I think it ended up being about a year between the final. It's like just under a year, I think. Icebrood Saga ended in April of 2021, and End of Dragons ended up releasing right at the end of February in 2022. There was a massive void in the game's history. And honestly, this is where things start to get impressive and actually pretty remarkable, in my opinion. And this is all, I think, handled by another change of leadership. Of course, Mike Z was no longer the game director, and we actually didn't know who the game director was for a very long time. And it actually turns out that it wasn't even necessarily just one person. As we get to this studio update here, oh yeah, guess who's back? So we have JT, who is now stepping up to take control of Guild Wars 2. And we also have two very familiar faces coming back. The legendary, kind of one of the original big dogs in Guild Wars 2, Colin Johansson, and an ex-community member turned developer, kind of a head of esports and competitive kind of guy. And now, of course, he was head of live operations initially and then stepped up to game director. It is going to be Josh Grouch Davis, who is now the Guild Wars 2 overlord. And this is where things started to really turn around a little bit in the history of Guild Wars 2. Because with these gamers came a lot a really big shift in the mentality of the company, and honestly, the direction of the company, and certainly of the game as well. Guild Wars 2 and ArenaNet has always been a weird company, a little bit stuck in the past, right? But also simultaneously a little bit lost. At the very beginning of Guild Wars 2, it's like, oh yeah, we're going to do a PvP game with World vs. World 2. It's going to be like open world PvP and loads of PvP. Whoa, and esports. Whoa, that's crazy. Then then they said, oh yeah, we're also not doing expansions. We're doing Living World. Then we're like, oh, actually, this Living World thing, it's not really working. We're burning all our devs out. Okay, we'll do expansions. But wait, we're going to do raids. And we're going to go more towards the Holy Trinity as well, with proper healers and proper supports. Kind of bring that in there as well. And we're still going to do esports. And then they decided, oh, actually, no, let's not do that. Let's kind of do a movie game. And Living World 4 and Path of Fire came out. Incredible cinematic universes, right? Where it was a very, very story-driven, very focused on characters, not really focused so much on PvP, definitely not on PvP and World vs. World, and kind of falling back a little bit on the PvE elements with raids and so on. That kind of fell apart. Basically, the game has not had a consistent vision for a particularly long time. But honestly, this change in leadership, another one, seems to be where things really started to turn around. And this is also especially true with communication. Communication has always been a really, really big sore point for Guild Wars 2, because they sometimes don't do it, right? And that has obviously caused a hell of a lot of frustration, to be honest. In the community, of course. And with this leadership change, that stepped up a lot. All of a sudden, we were getting regular roadmaps, regular updates about the future, devs interacting with the player base. Hell, I even had a podcast, in fact, with the developers talking about the new World vs. World rework system alliances, right? This is crazy. I'm speaking with the game director, guys. And you know what's really funny about this is that this handsome devil over here wasn't a developer at the time, but my man Roy here actually also now, of course, works with ArenaNet as well. So, you know, like, it's like a triple dev tea time podcast right there. Pretty insane, huh? 3 devs on this one. Wow. Isn't that exciting? Isn't that exciting indeed? And hell, look, guys, can you believe this? They even hired a community manager. ArenaNet Double Tap. And you know what? This is the weird thing. Double Tap understood memes. Oh, yeah. For a long time, ArenaNet was scared of Pepes. They didn't know what a kappa is. They didn't know what any of this stuff was. They barely knew what Twitch was. But that was about to change. ArenaNet understood, the new ArenaNet understood how marketing worked. They got Twitch drops on. They got some of their streamers onto the front page, including me, right? And this massively boosted engagement with the game, unsurprisingly, right? And Double Tap in here with the memes on the forums, talking to people on the subreddit. Honestly, it really helped stabilize the game and stabilize the morale and the community sentiment. But that wasn't all, because during this transitory period, at the end of the Icebrood Saga, before the expansion, ArenaNet did something that I think is genuinely one of the most brilliant moves I have ever seen. Okay? And that was something called Season of the Dragons. ArenaNet knew they couldn't release much content between the end of Icebrood Saga and End of Dragons. But what they were also very aware of is that most players haven't actually played through most of the game. The way the game works is that if you log in when a new piece of DLC, a new episode of the story is out, you get that piece of story for free. Otherwise, you'll either have to pay money or some of the in-game currency gems, which you can farm with gold if you want to. But it turns out that most players haven't actually played through a lot of this stuff here. There's a lot of it. It's like 10 years of Guild Wars here, right? And ArenaNet realized, wait a minute, what if, to keep people engaged, we just gave all of it away for free while we're working on the expansion, and at the same time, add old content that left the game when they used to do that. They used to kind of have actual content that would stay and be temporary. Or if we brought that back at the same time. So they brought back Living World Season 1, which is content that most players probably haven't seen. And they also release a piece of free content more or less every week or two for the entirety of this content drought. And it sounds kind of obvious and, you know, not super remarkable, but it paid off in an insane way. It turned out that people love this stuff. It made the game incredibly active. Way more people came back to the game. Player counts went up. They ended up keeping the game going, right? And, you know, maintaining a healthy population, even an increased population for the duration of the Season of the Dragons, right? And even better, they gave everyone a free legendary, okay, a free legendary amulet at the end of it to really incentivize people to do this. So people got caught up with the story. People had stuff to do more or less every week, right? Players got to experience the entirety of the game, and people were happy. That, alongside clear road mapping and expectations, it really soothed the, you know, the soreness, the fear, the anxiety that players had about the future of the game. For the first time in an incredibly long time in Guild Wars 2 history, people felt like there was a vision, there was a mission, right? And that they understood what was going on. The uncertainty had been soothed a little bit, and people felt confident in the future of the game. And I just think that is so remarkable, given that there was basically nothing fresh being added to the game, right? The game had been rocked by layoffs, right? And complete 180s in design direction, yet skillful communication, community management, and a good, clear design philosophy really kind of stabilized the, you know, the leaky ship that was Guild Wars 2 at the time. And then, after all of that, and a short break after that was done, alongside some Living Season 1 episodes, we got Ender Dragons. Here it is. And you've got to actually give ArenaNet a lot of credit. Like, there's a reason why it won a lot of awards, actually, and was considered to be one of the top releases in terms of MMOs of 2022, is because it actually was. This expansion did a lot of things really well. The story was executed well. I think the art style really captivated a lot of people's imaginations alongside the music. The gameplay was solid. A lot of the new maps and new content were well designed and well done. It was definitely a little bit rough around the edges, probably the most rushed expansion Guild Wars 2 have ever done. It certainly wasn't perfect, but it really did a good job of restoring even more confidence in the player base with how things actually turned out. And this was especially true, actually, because of the iterative approach that they took. ArenaNet have in fact, very notorious for, honestly, not really addressing things, okay, that go wrong in the game, right? And just kind of saying, oh yeah, if we ignore it, it will go away, guys, we promise. But actually, that didn't happen. There were concerns about rewards at the start of the expansion. And yeah, ArenaNet then addressed that and fixed that. There were concerns about the strike missions at the start of the game. And yeah, ArenaNet addressed this very effectively by fixing some of these problems and actually attacking them to improve them and kind of putting them up to the standard that players were looking for. During this time as well, and even during some of the downtime, right, there were major balance updates. Historically, and to be pretty brutal here, ArenaNet have not really thought of balance and skill design and the way all the different classes lock together as particularly important. Like, that's certainly my opinion as a very long-time veteran. ArenaNet haven't really cared about it that much. They've seen it as a very low priority. That's changed. We now have a full team that's dedicated to balance, and it's got significantly better. Now here, kind of, you know, nearly a year after End of Dragons, the balance has never been better in Guild Wars 2 with regards to a lot of PvE content, and it's improving in all areas of the game as well. And there's even regular communication about this. In fact, we had a full live stream, in fact, talking about the balance philosophy. Here, look at, what a giga chat. Oh my god. Talking about how gameplay roles work and what they view as balance and how they, the design philosophy that they actually have for the game. This would have been unheard of before 2022. If someone told me that ArenaNet would do this, I would have thought they were joking or trolling or trying to bait me into getting upset right, before this new leadership change with ArenaNet. Like, these are all the things that strike me as remarkable about 2022, was the way this game was recovered, the way the community was able to recover in terms of how depressed everyone was. And how ArenaNet managed to rally the game and really get it back on its feet. Incredibly commendable. But again, all of these things kept going through here with more iteration and consistency, because that's what the game has always lacked, that consistent element of actual improvement instead of like doing one thing, abandoning it, and moving on to the next. That's always been a big problem with ArenaNet, but it seems very clear. And over the past kind of 2 years, ArenaNet have really started to rebuild the trust that they aren't going to do that anymore. They're going to be looking at old systems and trying to upgrade them, trying to make various elements of the new player experience better, various elements of instance content less confusing to newer players, making the balance better so that you have more freedom of choice and, you know, you can play any build you want and be incredibly effective. These are all long-standing concerns with the game that simply haven't been addressed super well. Replayability has also been a big issue, and this is something that Ender Dragons and 2022 have delivered on massively. And that's, of course, because of strike missions. And while we talk about strike missions, you know, the one that everyone's going to want to talk about is, in particular, the challenge modes for strike missions. ArenaNet has always been in this hell mode, where a lot of the content they make is way too difficult for most players, but far too easy for players who really want a challenge. And this is because ArenaNet has consistently refused to add mainstream difficulty settings to the game. That changed with Ender Dragons, as every boss they added to the game, 4, in this case, all came with a challenge mode that significantly increased the difficulty. And the really big highlight is absolutely Harvest Temple challenge mode, right? And Harvest Temple challenge mode was, honestly, it has done more for the hardcore community in Guild Wars 2 than all raids combined. And I think that's not even an exaggeration to make that statement either. When this piece of content dropped, I would have actually said that the hardcore scene was on its last legs, like genuinely dying, like rotting away and festering. And part of that is because of the lack of content, but another big part of it was because a lot of the content that had been added to the game kind of wasn't hitting the mark. It was just a little bit too easy to really keep players engaged long term, but it was also very, very difficult for a lot of new players to actually get into and approach. And this is where Harvest Temple Challenge Mode came in. It is by far the most brutal encounter Guild Wars 2 has ever seen. There was a full race to Worlds First that took about a week to actually beat it for the first time, with thousands of people watching live and getting excited, even like daily report threads on progression on the subreddit. In general, an incredible community event. But what's more important is that there was a huge community that actually emerged around this. And I would say that the hardcore scene, and in general, the end games, not even just hardcore, just people who are into this type of content, into the really, really challenging stuff, want to push themselves, wanting to play with their friends and improve their skills. This has massively increased since this one fight has dropped, right? When this was released, I would have guessed there were maybe 200 to 250 people in the entire game capable of beating it. And that was true, by the way. There probably were that many people, because again, it took over a month to get over 250 people, I believe, who have actually beaten it. But now that scene has really flourished. There's an incredibly strong community around it. And there's now, I think, 1,300 people who have beaten this encounter, and thousands more who are trying and honing their skills and improving every single day. And of course, that's passed down to raids and strike missions, where more and more players are approaching this content. And because the strike missions all have a normal mode that is much more approachable, there's a much better avenue into this content. And more importantly, it allows players of all appetites the ability to enjoy the content. Previously, if this was a raid, if you were a casual player who just wants to kind of play through the game and enjoy the story, actually experiencing a raid essentially would have been off limits. It would have been off the menu, right? But now all players are able to enjoy a group experience and fight fearsome bosses in a way that they're comfortable with. This is addressing one of the massive design flaws that Guild Wars 2 has historically had, which I think is just absolutely fantastic. And we're going to see more of that down the line as well. In fact, of course, in 2022, we actually had another strike mission. And this was actually the first strike mission added to the game that wasn't with the expansion. This was actually part of the original Living World Season 1. And it's a completely new fight called Old Lion's Court. And you know what? This was another massive win for ArenaNet, in my opinion, and another massive confidence boost for the community. Because ArenaNet showed that, yeah, they can make a really cool non-expansion encounter that is actually a lot of fun to play and has some really exciting design. In fact, I think they really excelled themselves with this design. I would actually argue that it's better than most Ender Dragon strike missions, maybe even all of them, in terms of how exciting and fun the design is. It was, of course, not as challenging as some of the Ender Dragon strike missions, including Harvest Temple Challenge Mode, but I think that's not the only thing you've got to be looking out for. They can't make every single fight ridiculously challenging, right? That just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Right? You can't do that. And I think that they really delivered on this. Like, they delivered on their promise to continue creating really exciting content that is going to push players a little bit down the line. And I think looking at Old Lion's Court, yeah, I have a huge amount of optimism going into future strike missions that ArenaNet will deliver on some really exciting and really, really enjoyable content with regards to this stuff. And yeah, I'm not done yet, by the way, guys. And, you know, going through this, it really is interesting to me just how much was going on during all of this. We briefly brushed over how some world bosses got reworked and there was a ton of quality of life added to the game, common pain points in Guild Wars 2, talking about stuff like managing your settings, some issues around the new player experience and leveling, right? All this kind of stuff. There's loads of quality of life, like world bosses got reworked. I think I already said that, but listen, okay, we're going off the cuff here, guys. There's a bunch of stuff that actually got improved. They looked at fractals a little bit as well, and they're going to continue to do that. They looked at raids. They added a raid, they tried to add a raid easy mode of some kind to help players get into that content. A lot happened this year outside of just like raw content updates. I also want to highlight something else that happened with Harvest Temple CM, and I think that this is actually valuable, and I think that ArenaNet actually value this as well, actually. And that was, it really attracted the attention of players outside the game and was a very powerful marketing tool. And the absolute best example of this was absolutely when some very high-level World of Warcraft players became very interested in the game. In particular, the video in the background right now is actually me being interviewed by Liquid Maximum, who is a top high-level world's first raider from World of Warcraft. And he was very interested, seemed very interested by the game. I also had kind of the main competition. There are two guilds in World of Warcraft, of course, Echo and Liquid, who kind of go toe-to-toe for world's first. I also had the leader, or, you know, the raid leader and CEO of the other organization, Echo, a guy called Scripe. Was also in the chat talking about Guild Wars 2. I think that is absolutely remarkable. Look, if you asked most other MMO players about Guild Wars 2, they would probably put Omega Lul. They would probably laugh and say the game has joke level, easy mode, baby content, right? And then say, yeah, play a real game, right? That's, you know, that's kind of like how some of the memes, that's obviously a bit exaggerated, but you get what I'm saying, right? There's a bit of a meme here. The game's reputation outside of Guild Wars 2 has honestly been pretty poor, right? People do not view Guild Wars 2 as a serious game, right? That's just a fact. They're not right, okay? Because it is a serious game, right? But most people outside the game do not view it seriously. Harvest Temple CM, I think, changed that a little bit, right? Especially when it comes to raiding and endgame. And I think that's actually really, really important. And I'd be very surprised if ArenaNet didn't recognize that as well, right? Because this is not like a trivial thing. The fact that players of this caliber and of this level are looking at the game and are potentially interested in the game, I think is pretty cool. Right? I think it actually is a pretty damn cool thing to see there. And that was also another really big highlight of the year. Especially for me, because I'm in there as I'm farming the clout as the clout demon, guys. Let's go. Let's go. And of course, about this time, the game also launched on Steam as well. Right? Yeah, it never stops, guys. Oh my god. It's crazy. And the Steam launch, you know, I think players and maybe even the Guild Wars 2 community kind of perhaps misunderstood the purpose of the Steam launch. I think some players were kind of expecting like, oh yeah, this is going to be the thing that puts Guild Wars 2 back on the map, brings it back into play. That wasn't really what it was supposed to be. ArenaNet has been spending a lot of time recently, and, you know, again, with stuff like the new player experience, trying to get all their ducks in a line, trying to make sure that the game is kind of shipshape and ready to go. And Steam was part of that, right? Steam was not a thing about, oh, we're going to massively increase the population. It was more like, we're going to get our game on that platform. We're going to get Season 1 back in the game. We're going to try and fix quality of life and fix the new player experience. We're going to address these confusing systems to make the game easier to get into. That's what this entire big picture was. This is the big picture of the game, right? And Steam was kind of the, not exactly the final piece in the puzzle, but certainly one of them. And one of the major pieces in this particular puzzle, right? And it worked. Honestly, a lot of people got into the game, and the game has a respectable amount of concurrent players even now. But again, bear in mind, there haven't been any content releases. Those are all just players playing through what's already there. Now, the key is that every single time there's a new release, boom, Steam is going to bolster that and bring more players into the game. Every single time they drop an expansion, boom, that's going to raise attention to the game, and people are going to get back into it even more so. And Steam is just a massive marketplace. You've got to bear that in mind, right? Steam is where so many gamers look to find new games to play, look to see what's hot right now, what's interesting, what do they want to get into, right? So it's no surprise that ArenaNet invested heavily in trying to get onto this platform, right? Especially as they're free-to-play, right? Of course, because free-to-play is a big thing on Steam. So that was a very sensible, strategic decision. And again, it wasn't the be-all and end-all. This is a long-term plan. And this is what, you know, the new leadership team at ArenaNet has always been saying, is that it's a long-term vision for the game, right? It's going to be a continuous thing that is not just going to be like, oh yeah, we're just going to do this one thing and then abandon it. ArenaNet has made it very clear that they are actually very committed to Guild Wars 2 now. Extremely committed to continuing to develop this game and push it into the future and modernize the game. And another thing that also completely confirms that, of course, is that the game has actually now moved to DirectX 11, almost fully at this point. I think we're still in the final stages of getting it fully polished up and added, but yeah, that's right. Another big complaint about Guild Wars 2 is that it runs like ass. And therefore, the devs said, you know what? We're going to make it slightly less run like ass. And they succeeded. Because Guild Wars 2 is an old game, right? It's an old game. It is. It is, in fact, all the way from 2012, of course, but that's not the full story either. Guild Wars 2 is actually built off the back of the Guild Wars 1 engine, and Guild Wars 1 was out in 2005. So it's not exactly a 10-year-old game. It's actually closer to a 15-year-old game in some respect. And that is why the game doesn't exactly scale super well with modern technology. And of course, it would be a lot of work to fully port the game to the most modern rendering meme, which would be DirectX 12. And it's unfortunate they weren't able to do that, because I believe DirectX 12 is a significant step up from DirectX 11. But to be fair, they really actually did make it work a lot better, with a very interesting post and some great communication from one of their engine engineers, giving us some graphs, and we can all pretend we understand what they mean. But anyway, this also drastically improved the performance of the game. It's certainly not perfect, but it certainly is a whole lot better than it used to be. And this is another thing that they're doing to prepare the game for the future. And they're even looking at doing a few more graphical updates, of course, performance optimizations down the line. This is actually something they've spoken about very recently. They're very committed to this. They spoke about this just before they broke up for the new year, kind of the Winter's Day break. I kind of dropped this in there. Oh yeah, we're doing big stuff. You know, we're going to make our trading post actually not lag. We're going to wrap up the DX11 transition. Oh, wow. Exciting times. Very, very cool stuff. But anyway, it was continuous. DX11 also being thrown into the mix. During all of this too, another big rework was happening to the game, and this is the change in World versus World. The way World versus World works currently is that you have servers, you join a server, and that is your world. And you face other servers in battle in big realm versus realm PvP. But that is actually being changed. It's going to be changed to be a lot more guild-focused in a system called Alliances. Now, Alliances is a bit of a memed system. Alliances were announced 1,797 days ago at the time of this video. So a little bit of a wait on this one. I think most people have kind of given up hope entirely on Alliances, but this year was the first time we actually saw progress on this. We had some actual tests where they tried out the new world system, which is basically worlds are comprised of groups of guilds. We haven't seen alliances themselves yet, which is basically groups of guilds like actually unified and linked together as opposed to just guilds like randomly smushed together. But that's going to be coming in 2023. So yeah, we can talk about that in the 2023 year in review when we get to that thing. But still, more progress than we've ever seen before. When it comes to this very, very important feature that's getting reworked, right? All of that happened in 2022. And during all of this time, the key thing, I think the most important thing, is not just the fact that Ender Dragons outsold the previous expansion where people were much more confident about the game, because that already happened. It's not the fact that there have been more new players in Guild Wars 2 than since the game went free to play back in 2015, I think. That's not the deal. It's not the fact that the player base has doubled over the last couple of years, even with essentially very, very little content being added to the game. In my opinion, the really big, impressive, remarkable achievement that Guild Wars 2 and ArenaNet have had is turning the community around from being in pure despair and utter doom, just people waiting for the end, right? Into, in my opinion, a far more optimistic and enthusiastic community who are genuinely excited for the future of the game, right? That's it. And yeah, in my chat, you're going to see a few doomers. But in my opinion, the redemption arc that ArenaNet has had and the newfound solidity is absolutely remarkable and incredibly impressive. And I'm not talking about for Guild Wars 2. I think it's genuinely impressive from an industry standpoint that they've been able to pull this off. I've really got to tip my hat to the team, the leadership team, and of course the development team, and everyone on board at ArenaNet for making this happen. Because I genuinely believe that a lesser studio would have completely folded, right? I'm not gonna lie. I do not think. Yeah, before End of Dragons came out, people were calling it End of Development. Okay, that's not even a joke. People were calling it End of Development. Like, it's over. The game is done, right? Yeah, I mean, well, some people probably still would do that, right? But most people at this point don't. And that kind of basically brings us up to where we are, I think. I was going to flex and show my cool war meeting as we welcome people to Steam, and I guess I could have talked about one of my favorite things we did this year. I had an hour on the Twitch front page, and we tried to show off all areas of the game. We tried to show off raids and fractals and strike missions and jumping puzzles, right, and mount racing and all this kind of incredible stuff, right? But, well, you could watch that yourself, okay? It's an hour long, okay? You're good to go. Just get in there and watch the whole bloody thing, okay? But yeah, I think that actually kind of just about wraps things up for Guild Wars 2 in 2022. I think remarkable. Remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. That it went this well. Considering the circumstances, considering the context from before the game, and what had happened just a few years prior to this, where the game was then, where the community was then, compared to where it is now, it is night and day, right? An incredible year for Guild Wars 2. And certainly from my perspective as well, you know, there's a reason why I'm talking about this. There's the reason why I wanted to tell this story. And the reason I wanted to tell this story is because I really want to shine a highlight on this, but also really talk about how for the first time in a very long time, I personally feel like there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Like, trust me, I've been there too. Back in 2019, I actually couldn't take it, guys. You know, like, that was when I you know, as a gamer who played Guild Wars 2 since day one, you know, I played Guild Wars 2 from the head start. Hell, I played Guild Wars 1 as well. I quit the game in 2019, guys, to go play Classic WoW. You know, it was like, no, I am not having fun. I am not having fun in this game. I don't want to play it anymore. And I left for a good chunk of time. And it was because I thought that the game was just never going to... I didn't see any hope. I did not see a light at the end of that. I was like, look, I could just make it through. I could get through. No, I thought I couldn't do it. And now I am more optimistic for Guild Wars 2 than I ever have been in the game's history, I think, since the very launch of the game. I think this really is the brightest time in Guild Wars 2 history. I think the game is going to actually turn into something truly spectacular over the next couple of years. And I will talk about predictions at some point, but I think we've done enough here. We're not going to talk about predictions just yet. But I think the next couple of years are going to be super, super exciting for Guild Wars 2. And I genuinely believe that the game is going to reach some new heights and really show its true potential in a lot of areas of the game and show it's, you know, what it can really be. It's very, very impressive stuff. It's not even copium, guys. It's no copium. No copium, no copium, no copium. It's all realium, right? It's all legit. And that's it. That, my friends, in my opinion, in a slightly scuffed and roundabout order, but hey, that's what you're here for, right? That is the story of Guild Wars 2 in 2022.